Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. With us on the program, as mentioned, Frank Soriano. He's the author of the book Beyond the Perimeter, Lead Yourself, Build Relationships, Think Systems. Frank is a seasoned Toronto-based keynote speaker, workshop facilitator, and a leadership development consultant, holding a combined honors BA from York University. Frank's early professional days as a rehabilitation counselor well-formed his middle, senior years in progressive leadership and management positions within the fields of health, wellness, and workplace safety. He spent the last 10 years of his organizational life working as an internal consultant, focusing on leadership development, the delivery of human resource products, and developing customized interventions for work teams. The book, as I mentioned, is Beyond the Perimeter, Lead Yourself, Build Relationships, Think Systems. With us from Toronto, Frank Soriano. Frank, a pleasure to have you with us on the program. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Rick. It's it's a pleasure to talk about something that is fascinating to me, and I hope to your listeners as well.
I'm sure it is, and I really enjoyed having a chance to read the book. And there's so many leadership books out there. Let's start with that, because this really is not leadership as a standalone topic. Is this? This really is looking at it from a different angle, one that we don't normally get a chance to think about.
Yeah, actually, Rick, the whole thrust of my purpose, I think, in writing the book is that I don't believe that leadership is just something you practice when you go to the office. I think that leadership is essentially a way of life, and I think the conversation needs to start at home, especially with our children at a very, very young age. And, as I pointed out in the book, that first and foremost, we need to lead ourselves before we're actually capable of leading others. And so I think it's, if I can put it this way, it is a way of life. It's not a concept that is academic in nature or that you practice once you achieve a certain status in an organization from a hierarchical perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you mentioned that. As I'm reading the book, it's like, well, wait a minute, this has applications far beyond the workplace. It's not like you turn the switch off when you go from home to work and back. This is really something that applies to all phases of your lives, and dealing with family members, basically any interaction with anybody. And you say something that's just so important. It's not necessarily what you say, it's how you present it. Talk about that concept. Yeah. It seems very simple, but it's something we don't normally consider as we're trying to develop our leadership style.
Yes. Well, I think most people would say that communication is probably an essential leadership skill, but we're not sometimes very mindful of how we deliver our message. It's one thing to be able to communicate or have a conversation, as I point out in the book, but I think the way you deliver the message is infinitely more important, because the way you deliver the message has a lot to do with how the person ends up feeling and therefore ends up hearing what you have to say. And so we have to be more mindful in terms of choosing our words, our tone of voice, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is very important, and a lot of people get caught up in the moment. I'm sure you would agree that in the day-to-day battle of organizational life, that sometimes we get swept away by things and we're not very mindful of how we deliver our message.
Yes, you get caught up in what's going on, and you're really not giving a lot of thought to the presentation, how it's being interpreted by the people that you're dealing with. Frank Soriano is our guest on the program. His website is franksoriano.com. That's SORIANO. The book is called Beyond the Perimeter, Lead Yourself, Build Relationships, Think Systems. The book's available all across the country. You can get information and link on directly to Frank's website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. It's interesting, you mentioned in the book that many epiphanies that you got about leadership came from your personal life, from observation. So this is not necessarily something you learn from a scholarly standpoint. It's something you basically learn from observing in real situations every day.
Yes, in fact, I emphasize that in my book very much, because some of the examples, as you well know, I extrapolate from my own experience in terms of bringing up children. And where better can you practice leadership than bringing up a family and interacting with your spouse and so on. So I don't think that all these things that I put in the book are necessarily reflective of organizational life, as I said, but of my personal experiences. And I think it's important to live your life authentically, if I can put it that way, which sometimes tends to be an overused word, but I can't imagine being one way as a leader at home and being one way as a leader at the office. Maybe I'm just very simplistic, but I like to approach my personal life as I approach my organizational life in a very authentic manner, being true to myself, being true to my characteristics, and generating motivation and enthusiasm both at home, at work, in the same manner.
The title, look, the main title is Beyond the Perimeter. Talk about the title and the perimeter that we all have.
Well, I think that this has a lot to do with thinking about our thinking. And so in my experience, the way we think has much to do with what we think we're capable of achieving, or how we approach the world, or how we bring forth our world for ourselves. So when I first started thinking about the book, and thinking about our thinking was an essential aspect of realizing our capabilities, going beyond the boundaries, I came across a story that told me that once upon a time there was a prison that had this perimeter that was built around it, and that when people crossed the perimeter, they were unfortunately executed, and it prevented people obviously from extending, or going beyond that particular perimeter. And it occurred to me that sometimes our thinking establishes these boundaries for us, and we never think to think beyond the way we've been thinking. So how do we actually try new things? Where do we get the confidence from doing that? We have to believe that we can go beyond the perimeter that is established by our current thinking. And our current thinking is often a reflection of certainly our education, our upbringing, our peer group, the way our parents influenced us when we were being brought up. And so I wanted to emphasize to people that we often need to go beyond the perimeter, because if we do what we've always done, as they say, we're always going to get what we've always gotten. So if you want to go beyond the boundaries established by your thinking, you've got to think about your thinking, I guess.
Well, yeah, and in the book Beyond the Perimeter, you talk about that just getting by is really not good enough anymore. We really need to step up our game, don't we?
Yeah, I think that organizations these days realize that if you're going to be better than the competition, you simply cannot rest on your laurels and enjoy your current success. I think you have to look for different ways of, doing more for the customer. A lot of companies spend a lot of money on research and development to develop new products. And that is all well and good. But organizationally speaking, we need to be able to work better as a team, to work more collaboratively, which is a word that has gotten a lot of press in business circles. But it's an important word. It's very different than just cooperating with someone, even in a team setting. I can cooperate with you and you can cooperate with me, and we go about our respective business once we've done that. But in a collaborative environment, we are mutually interdependent and accountable to each other for the outcome, and we have a vested interest in ensuring that the outcome is what we want it to be. So as an organization, again, we need to look at how we can improve our services and provide better services so that we can outflank the competition, so to speak.
You've mentioned that word several times, relationships, and that's a very important part of the book, Beyond the Perimeter. Talk about that and why that is so important, because we really need to have that, again, go back to the word collaborate. We really need that, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And I think, again, Rick, it's something that we sometimes take for granted, but we don't actually realize that if you have a team that is dysfunctional in nature and the relationships aren't there, how actually does the work get done? I mean, each individual has certain responsibilities, and that's fine. But in today's complex environment, people need to work better together. And if you don't have a relationship that's interdependent, how do you achieve a better business outcome? I think that it takes time and effort to actually develop a good working relationship. You just don't go into the workplace and say, hey, this is going to work for us. People need to know each other, what they have in common, if they share a common purpose, how they can help each other, and also coach and mentor each other. And this is why I emphasize the importance of leading ourselves as well as people who are in a leadership position. I think that when you get into a leadership position, not only are you responsible, but you're also accountable for the team's performance. But I believe that every individual is responsible for leading themselves, and by virtue of leading themselves and demonstrating the appropriate behavior, they can develop the relationships so that work gets done. Right?
With us on the program, Frank Soriano. He's the author of the book Beyond the Perimeter, Lead Yourself, Build Relationships, Think Systems. The book's available all across the country. Information at Frank's website, which is franksoriano.com, Soriano, franksoriano.com. Link on directly to Frank's website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. A lot of great stories, a lot of great information in the book. And there's one, and you talk in the beginning about the story between the captain and the mechanic. And the moral of the story is know where to tap. And I keep coming back to that because, again, it's really basic, but things don't have to be that complicated to be successful for us, do they?
No, they don't. And in fact, it's funny that you mentioned that particular story, Rick. People who have read the book have come to me and more often than not have actually referenced that particular story, because I believe that at the end of the day, whether, again, it's in our personal lives or our organizational lives, we know where things are not working, but we often don't want to undertake that for fear of it perhaps getting worse, perhaps it being contentious, perhaps of entering into conflict with other people. But at the end of the day, we need to address the issues, or what one author once called the undiscussables. We need to be able to bring it and put it on the table. Now, I'm very idealistic in the book, as you no doubt gathered, but I think we need to strive for idealism. We need to strive for the best possible environment that we can create in our workplace. So if your team dynamics are such that you don't have what I call psychological safety, you're not going to put the issue on the table. And this is why relationships, once again, are so important, and leadership is so important. A leader who heads up a team actually, I think, determines the culture in which people find themselves and work themselves and are able to function well. So, at the end of the day, a leader actually sets the environment for the team and how they interact, in my opinion.
Talk about that story before we move on. Know where to tap.
Sure.
Tell that story quickly, because it really, and I'm glad others were as influenced by that as I was. I read that and went back to it. It's like, geez, this makes so much sense, and it's something that it's something out of the book Beyond the Perimeter that I'm not going to forget. It's a great takeaway for me.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. It's about a captain who has this ocean liner. He can't get it started, can't get it out of port, so he calls a mechanic that he knows, and the mechanic comes down. Goes down to the engine room, and there's 10 engines, and he goes down each engine and he taps each one, and then he goes to engine number 4. He takes out a hammer, he taps it a little harder in a certain way, and he says to the captain, "Go ahead, start your engines." And the captain's just amazed, but sure enough, he calls upstairs, asks them to start up, and all the engines fire up, and the captain's just amazed. And the mechanic says, "Well, I'll send you a bill." So a week later, the captain does get the bill, a bill for $1,000, and he's quite upset. He said, "I can't believe this. The guy was here for 5 minutes. He walked up and down, he tapped one engine, and it got started." So he called up the mechanic and he explained the situation to him, and the mechanic said, "I'll gladly send you another bill. I understand." So he sends him another bill, and the captain opens up the envelope, and it says, it outlines what he did, and he basically says, tapping the engine, $5. Knowing where to tap, $995.
So the moral is know where to tap. It's a great story. It's vivid. It'll stick with you. Know where to tap. That's the key to success here. The book is Beyond the Perimeter. Lead yourself, build relationships, think systems. Frank Soriano, our guest. Rapidly running out of time. A few minutes left in the program. You identify some of the essential elements for being able to demonstrate great leadership. What are a couple of those? What are some of the real basics that if we don't have those, chances are we're not going to be a great leader?
Yeah, so Rick, I can cut it down to basically 3 fundamental elements of what I call 6 questions. So in my opinion, and this has to be taken in a holistic manner, a great leader has to have what I call a vision/purpose, because the vision of the organization translates down to purpose for his team members. So if you don't know how your work is contributing to the vision, you're in big trouble. Secondly, it's about relationships, and we've talked about that, and I think we all know that work gets done through relationships, so I think that is pretty self-evident. And then look at the world from a systems thinking perspective. Think about your thinking. How do you see the world? There are interacting parts that are interdependent and mutually accountable, and so I think that I would call those the 3 fundamental elements of great leadership. But I think there's 6 questions that every leader needs to ask themselves. First of all, why are we here and where are we going? Are the first 2, which speaks to purpose. The second 2 is, did I make a difference in my life, and did I make a difference in someone else's life? because I think that that's important when you're a leader and how you influence others. And the last two are, how do people experience me as a leader? But more importantly, how do people experience themselves in my presence as a leader? Do they feel that they have a self-esteem? Do they feel that they're contributing? Do they have value? And do I provide them with positive feedback on an ongoing basis so they actually feel these things and want to actually work as part of my team and have me as their leader?
You know, it's interesting as I'm reading, and I think you talk about it, that sometimes we don't really need consultants, people to come in, that we actually have the people, if we can move them beyond their perimeter. So often we think, okay, that's really above us. We need a new set of eyes. We need a new thought process. We need somebody coming in and maybe helping us with this. And I think what you're saying is part of leadership is being able to tap those people that we have on our team to maybe go beyond the perimeter that maybe we've established for them, at least mentally. And a lot of these questions can be answered just by encouraging the people we already have in the system.
Absolutely. I would agree with that completely. I think you have all the talent you need within an organization. I think that sometimes consultants, at the risk of putting myself out of a job here, but I think they facilitate a process, and sometimes they ask appropriate questions. But I think, again, that if you tap the right people, to use your terminology, and sometimes, by the way, it's the outsider, the rebel, the person who goes against the grain, who's actually asking the questions that no one actually wants to listen to, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes leaders actually need to hear what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And so if you can actually gather a group of people who can sit down and have an honest conversation because they know where to tap, I'm convinced that people know where to tap, that you can move that forward.
Conversely, if I'm the member of a team and I have leadership that actually wants my input, values my input, I'm thinking I'm a better employee than if I'm just in my little box and this is all I'm expected. That's all I'm going to give them.
Yeah, well, you feel that you're making a difference. I mean, it's one thing to actually go there and do your job day in and day out, but I think that people want to learn, people want to know, people want to feel that they're contributing. And if I value you as an employee, I'm also going to value your ideas. Let's face it, not all ideas can be implemented, but the very fact that you have that kind of conversation and say, how do you think we can make this better? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are also doing the work. So invariably, they come up against these roadblocks and impediments, and they'll be able to tell you, this is how we might actually improve things. And if you actually, take that approach and people recognize that you value their opinion, they're much more likely to work harder and go beyond their job description, in my opinion.
The book is an excellent read. It sort of tackles the idea of leadership, the concept of leadership from a little different perspective, and it's not narrowed down to just the 10, 12 hours you spend at the office leading the factory, wherever, leading every day. It has bearing on all aspects of your life. The book is Beyond the Perimeter, Lead Yourself, Build Relationships, Think Systems. Frank Soriano has been our guest on This Week in America. His website is franksoriano, SORIANO.com. The book is available all across the country. You can get information at Frank's website, franksoriano.com, or go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and you can link on directly to Frank's website. Frank, thank you so much for being with us on the program. I really appreciate it. Great book, Beyond the Perimeter, and thank you for being with us on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much, Rick. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate having this opportunity. Thanks again, and I want to wish you all the best.
Thank you. And remember the name of the book, Beyond the Perimeter. Frank Soriano, our guest on This Week in America. And we're right back after these messages. Don't go away.